All right, here's the big graph that we've gone through each week. So these are the projections for GDP. All right, so we now have added Bank of America. So we now have the 5 major institutions. Remember, we originally started with only Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley. Added Wells Fargo. Now we've added Bank of America. We know that the GDP was negative 4.8 for Q1. We know that in order to formally be in a recession, we have to get all the way through Q2, which means we are through April, May, and June, which means it will be the end of July, August, before we have the final numbers. So are we technically in a recession? No. Are we functionally in one? Yes, we are. All right, so we spent a tremendous amount of time previously talking about types of recessions. Everybody, to now include Bank of America, still predicting a V-shaped recovery, a sharp drop down, very well-defined bottom, and a skyrocketing ride back up to the top. All right, so let's take a look at some of these numbers. Every single financial house is predicting massive losses in Q2. We're already feeling that. This week in and of itself is probably, economically speaking, financially speaking, one of the worst that we have had throughout this thing. It is the worst that we've had with the job reports and a lot of the stuff that's come out over the last week to 10 days. All right. We know that next week's is probably going to be the same, if not worse. We know that we are in the worst of this right now, and we know that we will come out of this. All right, so going into Q3, if you remember from last week, Wells Fargo was predicting a negative GDP in Q3. They are now up in the positive. Well, Bank of America now has the negative one. All right, so Bank of America, welcome to the game. You can revise this next week, and it'll be fine. All right, but here's the interesting thing. Bank of America is the only one predicting the low, the negative, but they are also the only one that's predicting a genuine skyrocket in Q4. It's an interesting piece of data right there. All right, so that should make everybody rest a little easier with the economy. All right, and here's a great quote. This is the Morgan Stanley Chief Investment Officer. We believe the U.S. economy is set for a U-shape or even a V-shape recovery where the economic activity will bottom, perhaps very soon, and then very steadily recover. All right, so a little bit of a U thrown in there. We've talked about this, but here's why it can't be a U-shaped recession. A U-shaped recession is a very slow drop to the bottom relative to a V. Has anything been slow about the last 6 weeks? Do I need to go back to look at the unemployment claims and look and figure out whether this has been a slow drop to the bottom? All right, I think everybody would agree we just dropped like a rock. All right, so take it for what you want. All right, so now talking more about the recovery. All right, what are we looking at? For the first 6 decades after World War II, the housing sector led the rest of the economy out of each recession. Expect it to do the same this time as well. That's the chief economist over at CoreLogic. If we look at the chief economist for the National Association of Home Builders, as the economy begins to recovery later in 2020, we expect housing to play a leading role. Housing enters this recession underbuilt, not overbuilt. That was a big problem in 2008 leading into it. Based on demographics and current vacancy rates, the U.S. may have a housing deficit of up to 1 million units. Low inventory. All right, so here, let's get to this right here. Homeowners that are out there. A couple different things for you. If you've had any thoughts of selling your property, you want to move up, you want to move down, you want to move left, right, or do a different state, now is a good time to do that. You can join in and contribute largely to the recovery of our economy. Sell your home. Those of you that have not had any thoughts of selling your house, but you've lived in it for more than, let's say, 4 or 5 years, you've gotten a little more familiar with your house over the last 6 to 7 weeks, I'd imagine. What are some things that you want to change in that house? Is there one room in particular you can't stand anymore? Can it be changed? And is it time to sell that house and buy a different one? Just saying.